Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Torrents as Yet Unknown, Daring Whitewater Ventures into the World's Great River Gorges, by Wickliffe W. Walker, narrated by Christopher P. Brown. He prays to the genius of the place, and to Earth, the first of the gods, and to the nymphs, and as yet unknown rivers. Virgil, Publius Virgilius Maro, Aeneid, Book 7, line 136. Preface. On every continent but Antarctica, rivers course through rugged mountain ranges and clefts in the terrain like arteries through Earth's body, gorges and canyons too inaccessible and hostile to serve as waterways for migration, trade, or conquest. These remain to this day places of spiritual wonder, of geographic enigma, of hidden danger and awesome beauty. The rivers don't carve only the bedrock. They shape the men and women who confront them as well. Men and women frequently as relentless and complicated as the rivers they explore. In the 19th century, geographic exploration began to turn away from its utilitarian roots. Edward Whymper and the Duke of Abruzzi began reaching for the inhospitable mountain peaks of the Alps and the Americas. Robert Peary, Roald Amundsen, and Robert Falcon Scott for the frozen poles. Beneath a veneer of scientific curiosity lay an emerging foundation of romance and adventure. The prophets sought were no longer gold, whales, or furs, nor the Northwest Passage to the Orient. These were journeys of pure discovery, for the science, for the adventure itself, for the books, for the packed lectures at the Royal Geographical Society and similar venues. And on May 24, 1869, when Major John Wesley Powell launched his 4 wooden dories down the Green River on his way to the Grand Canyon of the Colorado, a new discipline of whitewater expeditions joined these quests. Yet, while mountaineering evolved, developed its own traditions, and created a remarkable canon of climbing literature, for almost a century Expedition Whitewater remained stagnant. The dories remained of wood, the canoes of wood and canvas, the kayaks of sealskin or rubberized canvas stretched over a fragile skeleton, and the tumultuous mountain gorges remained beyond reach. The second half of the 20th century saw dramatic changes in the aftermath of World War II. War spawned materials and industries, greater middle-class disposable income and leisure time in the West, and the proliferation of communist governments in the East all contributed to 5 decades of almost unbelievable growth in whitewater adventuring. Born in 1946, after my father's return from the Pacific Theater, I played a bit part in that whole process myself. In the following chapters, I try to convey something of the wonder and awe of Earth's canyons and gorges, the thrill and adventure around each mysterious bend, and the remarkable pioneers who set new standards for river running. It is not my intent to enumerate the greatest river gorges on the planet, nor the most difficult river expeditions, nor the first descents of any stretch of whitewater. Fool's errands, all. There is not even an agreed convention for determining the depth of a canyon. How wide from the river may the rims or bounding peaks be to count as measuring points? And why does it matter, except for bragging rights? Likewise, why compare running torrents measuring tens of thousands of cubic feet per second, like the Indus and Tsangpo rivers, with steep, vertical-walled canyons with flows measured in the hundreds, like the Kaligandaki and Kolka rivers? The question of who or which team accomplished a first descent is usually equally immeasurable on these great gorges, Powell on the Grand Canyon being a notable exception. Different explorers often pick apart pieces of the puzzle at different times and water levels, achieving different degrees of success, and opinions will vary about which is the true first descent. Rather, I have selected river runs that I find of extraordinary interest because of their magnitude and diversity. 2 are in North America, 2 in South America, 1 in Europe, 2 in Africa, and 8, appropriately, in the Himalayas or Tibetan Plateau. The explorers are equally diverse, from a nomadic group of Polish university students on a 2-year odyssey, to a solo kayaker on an extreme 3-day run, to a commercial rafting entrepreneur ringleading a television extravaganza. This diversification, however, leads also to omissions. I have left out many amazing canyons and extraordinary expeditions, some because I had too little access to the stories, some because I felt that I could add little to books and films already available. For example, I regret the absence from this volume of Walt Blackadder and Rob Lesser, 2 kayaking pioneers both from Idaho, who were dominant figures in the 1970s and 1980s. Powell published the popular account of his 1869 Grand Canyon descent more than 2 decades after the expedition. With a sense of broad perspective, he wrote, "Many years have passed since the exploration, and those who were boys with me in the enterprise most of them are dead, and the living are gray with age." Most expedition accounts, however, have been produced shortly after return, when memories, emotions, and sometimes grief were fresh. My purpose in this volume is to revisit these expeditions from a distance of time, through the lens of my own 6 decades of river experience and the reflections of the many explorers who have been generous in sharing with me their time, recollections, and records, including private diaries. Finishing this narrative with an account of my own expedition to the Tsangpo in 1998 feels appropriate. It marked the first time that high-resolution satellite photography was available to the civilian world to reveal details about an inaccessible gorge in advance of going there, and satellite telephones had become small enough to carry in a kayak. As technology continues to advance and the Anthropocene flowers, some of the mystery and inaccessibility of the world's wild places is disappearing. Shrinking glaciers and other threats are degrading water sources and quality. Part of Major Powell's route down the Colorado has long since been consumed by the Glen Canyon Dam and Lake Powell, and even bigger and more rapacious hydroelectric projects threaten gorges, including some of those featured in this book. Some of Earth's most magical, perhaps even sacred places become more endangered every year. We must appreciate them while we have them, and record their wonders while we can. The current of the green seems eager to bear us down through its mysterious canyons, wrote Major Powell. We're just as eager to start, so off we go. Wick Walker, Lexington, Virginia, January 2023. Chapter 1. Paradise on the Big Screen. The Indus River. One of us did the cussing. The others prayed. Don Hatch. July 11th, 1956. From a precarious jeep track hundreds of feet above the White Torrent, the Indus River appeared bigger than anything Bus Hatch had ever attempted to raft. Probably bigger than anything anyone had attempted to raft. Barren khaki hillsides rose thousands of feet in all directions, rocky ribs exposed above the slopes of scree and tangles of low bush so brown as to appear as hard as the rock itself. And just over that immediate horizon, unseen but nevertheless a dominating presence, loomed the icy summits of the greatest mountain ranges on Earth, the Karakoram, the Himalayas, and the Hindu Kush, pumping their glacial meltwater into the gorges of the Indus. Less than a month before, the phone had rung in the dusty, cluttered office of Hatch River Expeditions in Vernal, Utah, and the operator announced a call from New York. Bus Hatch, age 56, stocky but athletic, his deeply tanned face accented by round wire-rimmed glasses and gray stubble, listened intently to the voice on the other end of the line. Perhaps the best-known voice in the English-speaking world, as the caller made an audacious proposal. Bus spoke little, jotted some notes, and, in the end, said yes. Replacing the handset in its cradle, he immediately dispatched a substitute trip leader to pull his oldest son, Don, off a raft trip down the Colorado through the Grand Canyon. Then Bus asked if anyone in the office knew where Pakistan was. The young country had been part of India when he went to school. Now Bus had his answer. At the end of the road for the jeep, in a tiny village named Gold, Bus, Don, the expedition's leader, Otto Lang, and Pakistani Army liaison officer Captain Aleem prepared their equipment for a launch early the next morning. Their attempt, if successful, would be the first known whitewater run in the Himalayas. Hired village laborers spent hours hand-pumping an enormous inflatable raft that was 27 feet long and 7.5 feet wide. One wooden platform spanned the center for an oarsman. Another on the stern mounted a 10-horsepower Johnson outboard motor. Lang and Captain Aleem had no idea what to expect. Bus and Don Hatch did. Perhaps. The launch point onto any river is a special place. A place to abandon the road or trail or whatever line on the map leads back home to family and origins. A place to commit to the current that flows but one direction, into the future. And when that future cannot be known, not the course of the river or its dangers, then the put-in is also a place of fierce anticipation, of dread suppressed, of the copper taste of adrenaline. A place of voices too loud, jokes too hearty, the bustle of loading boats exaggerated. The urge is overwhelming to relieve the tension through action, to launch, even if it is just to round the next bend and establish the first camp. Yet this gravid moment of anticipation is also one of the most intense in any explorer's lifetime, a moment to drink in and savor. The team launched at 6:45 a.m., and the power of the Indus shocked even the two Whitewater pros. Estimating the size and difficulty of rapids from hundreds of feet above is notoriously difficult. The Hatches knew this, of course, even if their companions did not. But the eye sees what experience leads it to expect. And in the Himalayas, just as the respiratory system must acclimate to the thin air over a period of weeks, so too must the eye and brain adapt to the Titanic scale. Legendary British climber and explorer Eric Shipton articulated the dynamic in this description from the early days of his landmark 1934 exploration of Nanda Devi with H.W. Tillman. I was not yet used to the immense scale of the gorge and its surroundings. Tillman suffered from the same complaint. We also had great difficulty in judging the size and angle of minor features. However, the eye gradually adjusted itself, and soon we began to move with more confidence. The glacial meltwaters of the Indus thundered through the canyon at roughly 4 times the volume of the Colorado that Bus and Don were used to, perhaps 100,000 cubic feet per second, and the rapids were steeper and more continuous. As always, when nature challenged them, the Hatches deployed their prodigious river skills and cowboy humor. They gritted their teeth but also cursed and laughed to inspire confidence in their nervous passengers. At one of the rare calm eddies, beyond which the river narrowed and thundered ominously over a sheer horizon line and plumes of spray shot skyward, evidence of the chaos below, the crew stopped and stepped off the raft for a scouting mission. Isaac Newton got it mostly right. Water runs downhill, and rivers flow down to the sea. But in rapids, there are 2 exceptions, where the flow is back upstream. These 2 features lie at the very core of whitewater river running. An eddy is a roughly horizontal circular flow on the downstream side of an obstacle blocking the current, usually a rock in midstream or a shoreline protrusion. Water accelerating past the obstacle sucks water from behind it as well, which is then backfilled from water farther downstream, setting up a circular flow. From almost placid pools barely the size of a kayak on smaller rivers, to swirling maelstroms hundreds of feet in length with their own whitewater features flowing back upstream, eddies are the whitewater paddler's refuge from the otherwise relentless flush downstream. Whether you are powering a 27-foot raft, maneuvering a tiny kayak, or swimming after an accident, these are the spots to catch a breath, to glance over a shoulder to plan the next route, or to get out onto shore. In the most basic terms, running a whitewater river boils down to leaping from one such refuge to the next, eddy hopping in the whitewater lexicon. Edging downstream along the rock wall, Don was dismayed to see the entire river split around a huge boulder, then plunge about 25 feet in less than 30 yards, careening into the cliff wall on the right and creating a violent recirculating eddy on the left. But they reboarded and went for it. As the raft hit the point of commitment, Don revved the outboard motor and they accelerated down the tongue of racing water, like flies on our way to the sewer. In the massive white recirculating hole at the bottom, the raft folded in on itself, launching Lang backward into Don and almost knocking both over the stern. A hole is a roughly vertical, circular flow occurring when water flowing over an underwater obstacle is forced upward into one or more waves. If the upward thrust is too steep to resist the pull of gravity, it tumbles down into its trough, like an ocean wave breaking as it is forced upward by a shallowing shoreline. Like eddies, this circular flow can stop a boater, but often not in a good way. Riverbeds offer an infinite variety of configurations, of course, but when a wide hole is formed perpendicular to the downstream current, it can recirculate floating objects almost indefinitely. And depending on its size, it can be anything from a place for a kayaker to play and show off to a death trap. Also called stoppers or hydraulics, these are not the only hazards on whitewater, but they are probably the most common on the bigger, more difficult rivers. Half full of water, the raft careened toward the rock wall on the right, rode high on the massive pillow of water piling against the cliff face, then slithered along the escarpment to the pool below. Later that day, the raft and its exhausted crew drifted out of the narrow canyon to the wide, flat river by the regional center at Skardu, gateway to the Karakoram mountain range and connected to the rest of Pakistan only by caravan trails and a short military airstrip. Otto Lang cabled back to New York. Buss and Don Hatch made the first descent of the Indus Gorges from a point 30 miles above Skardu. Stop. I was merely a wide-eyed passenger, and have rarely witnessed such a cataclysmic force of nature, only comparable to being swept away by an avalanche. Stop. Ironically, no film was shot of that momentous day. Ironic because the expedition for which Don and Buss had been recruited was part of a film shoot. Otto Lang, an immigrant to America from the former Austro-Hungarian Empire, had parlayed his status as the ski instructor for Hollywood's elite into film directing opportunities. His team had brought with them to Pakistan the most sophisticated movie cameras of the day, and they were there at the behest of the most famous documentary filmmaker of his generation. No explorer had ever before attempted to raft the remote, gigantic rivers of the Himalaya. The unprecedented effort was the brainchild of Lowell Thomas, the voice on the other end of that telephone call Buss had received from New York just a few weeks earlier. Thomas was an incongruous product of the rough-edged gold-mining boomtown of Cripple Creek, Colorado. His father, a medical doctor and polymath scholar, drilled into him from childhood the formalities of elocution and oratory. He first made his reputation as a documentary filmmaker and adventure travel celebrity by tracking T.E. Lawrence across the deserts of Arabia during World War I. In the words of Lawrence biographer Malcolm Brown, Thomas breathlessly portrayed Lawrence's exploits in Arabia through films, radio broadcasts, and print to an audience hungry for victories and heroes during the dark days of the war. He almost single-handedly created the legend of Lawrence of Arabia, to the introverted scholar's dismay. The flamboyant Thomas emerged from the war in the front ranks of American documentary filmmakers. In 1930, the young Columbia Broadcasting System aired Thomas's nightly news program, the country's only national radio news show. With his resonant voice yet apolitical, folksy style, he maintained his preeminent position for 4 decades, with his show moving from CBS to the rival National Broadcasting Company, NBC, and back to CBS again as the news industry grew up around him. His nightly audience was estimated in 1936 to be 20 million, from Canada to the Caribbean. Soon after, Fox Movietone News made him the voice of newsreels in 15,000 movie theaters as well. In the small, clubby society that existed between the world wars, it seemed that Thomas knew personally everyone who mattered. At his elegant 500-acre farm estate on Quaker Hill in the New York Catskills, with its 32-room Georgian mansion house, the political, social, and business elite rubbed shoulders with professional athletes, artists, and European aristocracy. Thomas organized a softball team of neighbors and visitors like World War I ace Eddie Rickenbacker, world heavyweight boxing champions Gene Tunney and Jack Dempsey, Yankees slugger Babe Ruth, author Dale Carnegie, General Jimmy Doolittle, and New York Governor Thomas E. Dewey for friendly grudge matches against a team that was managed by Franklin D. Roosevelt and composed of the staff, correspondence, and Secret Service detail from his nearby Hyde Park estate. Ike Eisenhower, Richard Nixon, and Sam Snead played Quaker Hill's private golf course. Europe's and America's top alpine skiers congregated on its ski hill. Eagerly embracing air travel from the earliest days of commercial aviation, Thomas was jet-set before the jet was invented. No place was too remote, no kingdom too forbidden. He had the connections to wangle invitations and expedite travel for himself and his camera. He toured India with the Prince of Wales, flew to both poles, rode horses over the Himalayan range to Lhasa to visit the Dalai Lama, rode camels across the Sahara to Timbuktu, drove over the legendary Khyber Pass to meet with King Amanullah Khan of Afghanistan in Kabul. By the 1950s, Thomas was heavily invested in a new movie-making technology, Cinerama, the IMAX of its day. Utilizing a camera that shot simultaneously through 3 lenses, the film was then projected on a custom-installed curved screen that wrapped 146 degrees around the front of the theater and combined with stereo sound to produce something of a 3-dimensional immersive effect. When he found himself appointed by President Eisenhower to represent the United States at the coronation of a new king of Nepal in May 1956, Thomas rightly foresaw that this might be a final display of vanishing Oriental splendor in the rapidly modernizing and globalizing world. He determined to use the occasion to showcase his new technology by displaying the exotic grandeur of the Himalayas and South Asia. Unlike his previous documentaries and travel logs, his chosen vehicle this time was to be a dramatic feature film, Search for Paradise, a loosely scripted story of 2 former American airmen traveling the world in search of adventure and fulfillment. In addition to the coronation scene in Kathmandu, a polo tournament in Hunza, exotic temples in Ceylon, and the legendary houseboats of the Vale of Kashmir, one highlight was to be a whitewater adventure, initially to be kayaking, later changed to rafting, where the mighty Indus River carves a cleft between the Himalayan and Karakoram ranges of Pakistan. In 1956, there had been no known whitewater expeditions anywhere in the region, and Lowell Thomas did not know the first thing about rivers or whitewater. But he did know how to find his Lawrence. He recruited one of his skiing pals, former Dartmouth Outing Club ski racer and pioneer Colorado kayaker Steve Bradley, to fly to northern Pakistan and scout the river in advance of the film crew. At the historic Flashman's Hotel in Rawalpindi, Pakistan, Bradley briefed director Otto Lang on the enormity of his task. Kayaks in 1956 were still European adaptations of the Arctic hunting boats, a rubberized canvas skin stretched over a wooden frame. Neither the kayaks nor the paddlers' skills of the day were remotely capable of withstanding the crushing powers of the rivers where Lang and his crew were heading. And mounted with the massive Cinerama camera, the lightweight raft Lowell Thomas had shipped out from a New York sporting goods store could barely stay upright in the hotel swimming pool. Before flying back to the States, Bradley advised Thomas that their only hope for success might lie with the legendary river runner Bus Hatch. Born into a pioneer Mormon family in Vernal, Utah in 1902, Bus grew up a skilled hunter, fisherman, boater, and general outdoorsman. He acquired his self-taught whitewater skills through passion, rawhide toughness, and luck, and when he first ran the Grand Canyon of the Colorado in 1934 in a wooden dory he had designed and built himself, he was one of the first 50 to do so since Major John Wesley Powell in 1869. Bus was gruff, daring, and self-sufficient. He expected those around him to be the same. Quick to anger when others did not equal his skill and nerve, he also met physical adversities, from wrecking a boat to running out of food or being caught in a winter ice storm, with dry Western humor. Crewmen with thick enough skin to stay on with him were intensely loyal. Initially, fellow river runners were few, and the fragile wooden rowboats used to shoot whitewater rapids were ill-suited to the task. The end of World War II, however, brought to market a bonanza of war-surplus rubber assault boats and huge 27-foot pneumatic pontoons from the floating bridges that conveyed the Allied armies across the rivers of Europe. Bus was quick to appreciate the utility of both on the big, fast rivers of the American West, and he soon had them rigged into craft that could carry not just himself and his fellow rivermen, but passengers as well. By the mid-1950s, Hatch River Expeditions, run by Bus, his sons, and other family members, was the premier outfitter taking groups down the Green and Colorado rivers, the Salmon in Idaho, and other major western rivers. Bus had no peers in Big Whitewater. Otto Lang did not return upriver to Goal the next day to repeat for the camera the record-setting run. He concluded that it was too high risk for his cameras and untrained crew. It was also, frankly, not very photogenic. From the narrow confines of the gorge, not a snow-capped mountain summit could be seen, and the sun reached the river only a few hours daily. Cinematically speaking, they might as well have been rafting through a strip mine. Bus and Don, of course, had made the trip to South Asia for the greatest whitewater adventure of their lives, and they were willing to go back and make the run again. But for producer Thomas and director Lang, the mission was not ultimately about running a Himalayan river, nor even producing a documentary film about a whitewater expedition. Rather, their goal was to make a Hollywood epic about an adventure in the Himalayas that would showcase Cinerama technology and transport American theater audiences to places beyond their imagination. In September of the following year, flyers for the film they were making would shout in bold type outside its world premiere at the Warner Theater in New York, "Dream no more. Now you can live it through Cinerama. Live the thunderous, swirling ride down the murderous rapids of the unconquered Indus River in a frail rubber raft." The crew reloaded all of their equipment into a Pakistan Air DC-3 and relocated 90 miles northwest to Gilgit. Almost a week of splendid river running on two tributaries of the Indus followed. Starting above the village of Nomal on two black rafts, one a large pontoon boat with a platform for the 3-lens Cinerama camera, and the second a smaller rubber assault boat, they filmed roughly a dozen whitewater.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?